story of Upbuild began in a monastery. On our quest to understand ourselves more deeply, we recognize that it is our attachment to our egos, our identities, that gets in the way of being our true selves. This podcast will help you understand your ego. It will help you better understand your inner world, the motivations, insecurities, and emotions that affect your every action and relationship. Welcome to Upbuilding the Self.
Hello, everyone. I am Michael Sloyer, and I am here with my podcast partner in crime, Razanath. Razanath, it's really nice to be here with you today.
Likewise, I love seeing the sun through the window. I know you're in Tokyo. I never get to see you in the daytime. And Japan is the land of the rising sun. So it's nice to be able to see the sun indirectly shining on your face.
Yes, it's a new sunrise here, and I'm feeling very energized as I start my day. Today's topic is one that I know is really important to both of us, and it is about charitable giving and how to have a healthier relationship with our charitable giving. And the reason why this is so important is because when we give, and we're not always aware of it, there can be a lot of different motivations that we have. And the reason why I'm so excited to have this conversation with you specifically is because we were having another conversation on a related topic a while back, and you had shared with me a line which was one of your classic wisdom bombs. And that line was, charity is not an act, it is a state of mind. And I thought, wow, this is going to fundamentally change how I understand my charitable giving and how I relate to giving to charity. And then a few weeks later, somebody had prompted me with giving a donation, and I went right back to my old habits. I took the email, I clicked on the link, I entered my credit card information very mechanically. I hit the donate now button and didn't think too much of it after that. And I realized that it has not fundamentally changed my understanding of how to give to charity. And so I wanted to get back in the room with you and have a conversation with that. So maybe you could get us started by sharing, what did you mean by that line? Charity is not an act, it is a state of mind.
Thank you. When I said that statement, it was very spontaneous. It just came of its own accord. And I don't necessarily deserve the credit for it. But I think the statement was formed from years of seeing people who have a charitable state of mind, not just when they are giving resources to other people, but by the way they interact. We can be charitable to our partner at home from a place of extending more patience. We can be charitable to a colleague at work by extending benefit of doubt. We can be charitable to our children by extending our presence in time. And all of that counts for charity. And where it comes from is the idea, and this is how I understood charity to be, there is something that you have or something that is fair for you to get a share of it, and you extend it to the other person. So for example, you are in a situation with your partner or your spouse where you both are hungry and you both have to eat at the same time. But there are other things that need to be done. So for example, if you have a child, and this is something that I come across a lot, where one person has to be with the child while the other person can eat a little peacefully. And when we both are hungry, our charity is tested. Can we extend ourselves a little bit so that one person can go first? So yes, in that situation, you are quote unquote entitled to eat because you're hungry. And at that time, can you extend yourself to the other in a way that gives the other person, and this is the example that I use in terms of patience, can you be more patient and extend that patience to your partner to say, you know what, why don't you eat first? that is what I mean by charity being a state of mind.
Okay, good. So we will come back to this as we are expanding the definition of charity. And let's start by focusing on the more traditional definition of charity, where we give financial resources. One of the things that I struggle with is that there are pure motivations, that there is some spark of a real care and wanting to do good and to serve. And then there's also a lot of egoic motivations. And so could you share what some of those egoic motivations might be and what we need to look out for when we're giving to charity?
That's a great question. I can see even in the definition of charity that I talked about, how the ego shows up, where I extend the time for my partner. And I'll come back to the more traditional definition of charity. I'm just extending myself to explain how it looks. You give your time and you extend yourself in that way. And then you're hoping that the person will come and tell you, oh, that was amazing. Or the person says, well, you did it to me last time, so let me do it for you this time. And you maintain an account. Even as you're giving in charity, you sort of maintain an account in terms of, well, what am I getting in return? Now, when you translate that into charitable giving, sometimes we give in charity because it gives us recognition. Sometimes we give in charity because it will help us get some tax benefits. Right? So sometimes we give in charity because we feel a sense of guilt that somebody else is giving and I'm not giving. So I need to give. Either it can be competitive giving, or it can be a sense of obligation where a friend is giving and so I feel obligated to give. And all of those arise not necessarily from a pure place of giving. Although the benefits of it may still be the same. People may still benefit. But here's the other thing with charity. Charity should benefit both the giver and the receiver. That's a true act of charity. And how the giver benefits, we can talk more about this. But when somebody is giving from a place of true charity, one develops a sense of, I would say, detachment from one's resources. I was once listening to my teacher, Radhanath Swami, and he was talking to someone. And that person asked Radhanath Swami a question. He asked the question, how much should I give? And Radhanath Swami's response spontaneously was, give till it hurts a little bit. And what he was saying is, it's only when it hurts a little bit do you understand what you're attached to giving. Otherwise, we can think of ourselves as being generous. But real generosity is when you're attached and then you still give without a sense of moral superiority or recognition.
Okay, I love this phrase, give till it hurts a little. And I think many of us, myself definitely included here, we give enough and we just get right to the point before it hurts a little bit. We get as close to that line as possible without going over the line. Just to summarize some of the things that you just shared, when we give from the ego, there could be a few different egoic reasons. The first might be adoration and recognition. The second could be a feeling of guilt, of wanting to uphold an identity. A lot of our work at Upbill centers around understanding the ego, which we think of as an identity of who we think we should be. And so if I see myself as a good person or a generous person, and I'm really attached to that identity, I might give so that I can keep that attachment going. I can keep that identity intact.
Right. Well, very true, which is quite paradoxical to the understanding of charity itself, right? When you use the word charity, we don't necessarily associate the word ego with charity. We consider that to be, quote unquote, an act of selflessness. And yet the paradoxical nature of charity, which is where the ego hides itself. And this is the complexity of the ego. Many times our egoic tendencies hide in the more generous acts of life. And charity is one of them.
Yeah, especially for people with money, where giving money doesn't hurt. it becomes a substitute for what would be considered real charity, something that does feel like it crosses the line into sacrifice.
Yeah, true. And otherwise, it doesn't become charity. It becomes a transactional act where perhaps I'm putting money to gain recognition. So it's almost like I'm purchasing something that perhaps gives me a bigger stage to speak on because of the act of charity or charities that I have done over my lifetime. But it sort of becomes like me starting to purchase more of what the ego actually desires than true giving.
Yeah, so there's a strong moral superiority component to it.
Yes, moral superiority is the other thing. So one thing is the validation of fame and recognition. And then moral superiority, I would say there is a little more nuance to moral superiority. Moral superiority can be a little more silent. And this is how moral superiority looks. I give $10 more than my friend did. And I'm not speaking a word about it or anything. I'm not even going to tell anybody that I did this. And I feel good about the fact that I have been a more charitable giver than my friend. And there's almost like the ego relishing itself behind closed doors kind of feeling. And that's what moral superiority tastes like in this situation.
This is great because it shows how it's possible to donate anonymously, but still be donating from the ego. It's almost like the ego is pretty pumped that I'm so not driven by the ego because I'm donating anonymously. And so that must mean that I'm not driven by fame or recognition.
And I have also been in conversations where people have donated anonymously and they criticize somebody who gets recognition. And it's done like, I really am not that person. And you see, there is a slight sense of moral superiority there, which it's pretty evident. And that also is coming from the place of the ego.
Why should we care about any of this? I've heard this a lot from people in my life. I used to be somebody who, I don't know if I would say this, but I would certainly be somebody that would think it. And that is, in order for me to do the most amount of good, I should just get really rich, get really successful, and then give it away. And who cares about my consciousness? That will be what will really have the most positive effects for society, because my time and my consciousness and my energy, that can only go so far. But if I'm able to give many millions of dollars, that would do the most good. How would you respond to that?
Well, there is truth to it in the sense that when you have earned a lot of money, you can create a lot of impact. The question that I always have to ask when that happens is, why do you have to wait to earn a lot of money in order to then give? Giving, again, as we said earlier, charity is a state of mind. Giving can happen even when you have little, right? And this goes back to the point around, well, give till it hurts. Sometimes we only desire to give when we feel we have reached a place of enough security. And maybe that security is financial. Maybe that security is status, in the sense, you know what, I was able to make a lot of money. I have proved to myself that I can do this, and then I'm giving it away. Why do we have to wait to earn a certain amount? We can actually start to give and increase with time. In fact, it'll sort of amount to the same thing. Perhaps the work can start much earlier than waiting for 15 years for you to make a lot of money and then start to give. So that's the first question I ask. If you have to give in 15 years, why wouldn't you give now? And usually we will find that we are attached. And that's the main reason why we're not able to give. The second thing around giving and giving a lot of money, I think it's true. The world needs resources to be able to change lives. There is a lot of suffering. And I think impacting people in many different ways, whether it's food, whether it's clothing, whether it's education, I think is absolutely necessary. I also think that money doesn't solve all the problems. I think there is plenty of money to go around. I think there is plenty of money in this world to actually solve all of the world's problems. So why are we still why is there an increasing set of problems? And why aren't problems being solved even when money is being put towards it? And to me, the reason for that is consciousness. I think we as a collective species are still self-centered. And unless and until we learn how to get out of that self-centeredness, while we may be able to give a lot of money, we may not be able to move the needle meaningfully from a point of view of really restoring parity. And when I say restoring parity, what I mean by that is, as I said earlier, there is enough money to solve all of the problems of the world. And when we can give from a place of not coming from the ego, we, in our giving, uplift our own consciousness. People who are actually using that money to serve others can be inspired by the way we give, and their consciousness is uplifted. The people who are at the receiving end of how the money comes, when they get to know about how the giving happens, their consciousness is uplifted. It creates a chain reaction. And to me, that is a movement along with the resource that is required for true impact to happen.
So this stuff is subtle, it's nuanced.
Yes.
And it takes time to play out for the consciousness to matter, but it will matter. The other thing that I'm thinking about is this idea of killing two birds with one stone. As somebody who's given in the past, why not both have a positive impact and get the recognition at the same time? And if that is the cost of my charity, then so be it. But the problem is that, and again, I've seen this personally, is that when the motivation, when the validation and the recognition is no longer there for whatever reason, then what happens to the other motivation? Which motivation is really the stronger one? And so do I stop being as charitable when that recognition is no longer available? And the answer for most of us is probably yes.
That's such a powerful example. I think that's the true test of charity is, are we giving because we really want to give? Or are we giving because we want something in return for what we're giving, which says that we're not truly invested in the lives of the people that we're giving towards. And sometimes we can say, no, I am invested in it. It's not to mean that I'm not invested in it, but what am I more invested in?
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm more invested in my own recognition, that charity essentially has the quality of transactional purchase of my own recognition. And to your point, after the recognition is achieved, or when it doesn't come, I may not be as motivated to give because the primary motivation behind it was the recognition, not the true benefit of the individuals towards whom the charity is going.
So, at a very practical level, how do we handle incoming charitable requests? This was a recent example. My cousin's kid was having a bar mitzvah, which is the ceremony in the Jewish religion where a boy becomes a man. And in honor of that ceremony, he was raising money for a cause, which I personally didn't feel too passionately about. But first of all, I wanted to support him. And I also did want to support the cause, even though it wouldn't have been the first cause that I would have supported. How might I think about my own motivations in this context? And what might be a healthy way of dealing with that situation and still giving, even though I don't feel truly passionate about it?
The basis of charity is love. And sometimes that love can be directed towards someone who actually has a love for a cause. So when you love someone and they love someone else, meaning in the context of what we're talking about, they love a cause or they love a certain set of individuals who they really want to benefit, you, by the dint of you loving that person, you sort of inherit what that other person loves. So in the example that you gave, that's how I look at that charity. You are giving because you're invested in the person who wants to give.
Beautiful. I love that, because in the moment, I wasn't connected to my love for my cousin and to my cousin's kid. It was more out of obligation and a feeling of guilt. And also, what would this say about me if I didn't give this nominal amount in celebration of this important cause? But there's just a slight reorientation that can happen in these moments. Even if I'm not fully invested in the cause, I am fully invested in my love for these people and in their love for the cause that they're experiencing.
Absolutely. And the other thing that is so incredible here is this young person, this young man, could have chosen to just use that money for so many things, right? And yet that person is choosing to give this money. And I think that's a cause of celebration. That at that age, somebody is choosing to give the money that they're getting for an occasion that's centered around them towards charity. This is also, as a part of the love that I referred to earlier, encouraging that kind of consciousness is direct charity, right? You're encouraging somebody's charitable consciousness, and that is directly encouraging charity.
So what would we offer to someone who has heard what we're sharing here and wants to better understand their own motivations? How might they be able to do that?
It definitely takes some introspection to ask ourselves, well, why am I really giving? And the ego is so deceptive that we can always build a story. But one of the things that I have seen about charity is when you give, your heart is moved and nothing else needs to be said. There is a way in which the giving reciprocates. When you give it from a pure place, by the dint of that pure giving, it touches your heart. And then you hear about how somebody's life has been touched. You feel very privileged to have been a part of it. That, to me, is the single biggest measure of true charitable giving. And everything else, we have to look carefully and see what is beneath the rug, behind our giving. Obligation and sometimes recognition. And all of those things, for most of us, including myself, there is the need for that recognition. Sometimes there is obligation, there is guilt that's moving the act of charity. And in those cases, what I would do is take a pause and reorient myself to why I should truly be giving. And while the other emotions may still exist, the fact that I have taken the time to step out of those and reorient myself to why I should be truly giving, I am making a movement in that direction, which is pretty significant. Rather than just unconsciously going about giving and taking in the recognition, is to step out and reorient. The second thing that we can do is when the recognition does come, and this takes a little courage, when the recognition does come for our acts of charity, at least making a silent note for ourselves that, yeah, this is the reason why I did it. And I want to be able to move beyond it. The next time that I give, I must at least strive to not be recognized, right? And making that note and trying to move again towards a higher level of consciousness in the next time that I'm giving, I think is also moving the needle towards pure charitable giving.
So the first check we need to do is, does this touch our heart? And are we receiving from this? Are we giving from a place of gratitude and feeling the beauty of our offering? And then the second is to catch ourselves in the act of giving from the ego. And as I'm sharing with you some of my egoic motivations in this conversation, I'm also feeling the release of the burden of some of those things. And so I'm seeing how that second suggestion that you have can automatically start the process of unburdening so that we can have the space and spaciousness in our heart to give from that pure place.
The main thing that we have to understand when we are giving in charity is that charity actually benefits our own life. And the reason why I say this is because we're so attached and so the ego is so entitled. And each time we can give charity from a pure place, we reduce the entitlement of the ego. And to have the opportunity to be able to do that is actually affecting our lives personally. So when we think about charity and think about how it's important for my own egoic purification, per se, recognizing that the act of charity will act on my own ego and approaching charity from that place, I think makes a very big difference to how we learn to give. We have to do it for ourselves.
Yeah, I've always hated the question, is there any such thing as a selfless act? Because that always felt like a false question. And yet what you're illuminating here helps to shine a light in a non-egoic way on the answer to that question.
The ultimate act of selflessness is giving from the place of the true self, right? And when you give, you become happy naturally, but you're not giving to become happy. You see, there is a subtle difference. You're giving, and happiness is a natural result. The reciprocation comes. And sometimes it's okay to give, to feel like that. That's fine too, because there is a desire to experience that selfless happiness. And that's, I think, close to pure. But ultimately, what is true act of charity is your motivation is not to experience a sense of happiness, although that may come. You just want to give because you see the people that you're giving to, their lives changing, their lives shifting, and that just reciprocates. That just comes back.
So let's tie it now back to what we spoke about in the beginning, how charity is not just an act, it's a state of mind, and how the definition of charity is way larger than just offering financial resources to somebody who might need it.
We can be giving a lot of money to somebody and treat the person who is very close to us in the most uncharitable way. I have experienced that personally. I am guilty of doing that. And it's taken time to recognize that, again, charity as a state of mind. You are the same. You want to reduce suffering in the world. And the thing is, everybody's suffering. While externally, it may not be apparent how someone who has a lot of money is suffering, I can also say that people with a lot of resources can sometimes be the most lonely people. So they're suffering, right? And we can't necessarily many times understand and put our finger on the suffering of the other. We tend to criticize, we tend to judge, we tend to be less patient, we tend to ignore. And that's because we don't necessarily recognize that there is suffering on the other side. And so with that premise, when your spouse or your partner is stressed and you have to extend a year, sometimes a patient hearing sometimes, so that you can relieve them from their stress, that is an act of charity. Because what you want to do is reduce the suffering on the other side. You want to increase the happiness and reduce the suffering. So when we adopt that state of mind and think about how can I reduce suffering around me, I tend to naturally become a charitable person. I can extend the benefit of doubt. I can be a little more patient. I can not come to conclusions about why somebody did something and put them in a box.
Beautiful. And with all of this, we again want to avoid the similar pitfalls of
recognition,
moral superiority, of trying to get recognition, of doing it from a place of guilt. And it's not that we're going to get rid of all of these motivations completely, but if we're able to see them, even share about them honestly as we're going through the act, and take responsibility for them, and then reorient ourselves towards that pure place of wanting to serve and to reduce suffering because it's in the best interest of another. That's the steps that we need to be taking on this journey.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Upbuilding the Self. Upbuild is a leadership development company that offers workshops, coaching, and other services to help you on the path towards being your best self, free from the shackles of the ego. To learn more about our work, visit our website, upbuild.com, and sign up for our newsletter to gain access to podcasts, reflections, and upcoming events. If you enjoyed this episode, please go to iTunes to leave us a review so that others can find and benefit from the podcast. We look forward to being with you again next time.